All right, so it's a pleasure to be here with you and to share this time with you. And I'll do my best to try to make the lectures engaging. Whether they're powerful, I don't know, but I'll do what I can. And I'll do my best to fulfill my responsibility. I take this responsibility rather seriously, frankly, because you guys are a captive audience. You're here for many important purposes, and you're also here with a chance just to be together for fellowship, for encouragement, and I want to be part of that. I want to provide you with some teaching that is solid and teaching that is scripturally based and is doctrinally faithful. I want to be able to do that as well. So I take this responsibility pretty seriously and hope I will fulfill it well. If at some point I say something in one of my presentations that you just cannot deal with, stick your hand up and let me know. And I'll engage you. And when I teach, I usually like to engage my group. I know this is a little different setting, but if you just have to say something, just please do that. Or if I'm using a phrase and you're just baffled, you don't know what I'm talking about, you can ask me about that too, and I'll be happy to try to explain things a little bit. So the topic I was given was these four areas, as you already heard: creation, fall, redemption, and then sanctification. And this is great because I like talking about all of those things. And it's very easy to do and very enjoyable to do. And the first topic is perhaps one of the most significant. And we're going to talk about creation. And I want to begin by dispelling a few wrong ideas, I believe, that are out there. A lot of Christians have this idea that the doctrine of creation is really important. Really important, and it makes the news all the time. In my own synod, in the Missouri Synod, we've had a little kerfuffle lately over the issue of creation, and it's made, it's occupied a few people, we'll put it that way. I've largely stayed out of it. I'm not that interested, frankly. And that's what I want to get at. That's my very first point. The doctrine of creation is exceedingly important, but the debate about 24-hour days, 7 days, what that meant, when it happened, young earth, old earth, how we reconcile creation with science, and all that stuff that seems to occupy everybody's mind. Everybody gets all worked up about it. I think it's largely not that important. It's largely not that important. And you need to hear me out on this. The reason it's not that important is because there are other things that matter more. There are other things that are more significant. I'm going to have to, if this dies, I'll just let it go. I just got this iPad. I was doing Surface for a while, and my kids decided I needed to upgrade in the world. And so this is my Father's Day gift, and my wife helped contribute to it. But anyway, so I'm still getting used to this, and we'll figure it out together. So just deal with me, and I'll work on it. But anyway, the reason it's not that important is because when we start arguing about when it happened, what happened, and exactly where it all took place, well, we don't know. We don't know. What we know is what Scripture has given us. And the reason people get really strident and pretty excited about this debate, frankly, is because they're worried about defending the Bible. And for them, it becomes an issue of, well, we got to believe the Bible, because if we don't have the Bible, the whole Christian enterprise collapses. Which is not entirely true, but that's another topic for another time. But as important as it is to say the Bible is a trustworthy Word of God, and I agree with this, and as important as it is to say that God created the world exactly as He wanted it, which I agree, the arguments about 24-hour periods and when this took place aren't that important. What is more important is what we learn from the creation account. And what we learn from the creation account is stunningly important when it comes to getting a grasp on how we think about ourselves and what it means to be human. That's what I'm very interested in, and that's what I want to talk to you about. Now, for the record, do I believe that God created the world in 24-hour periods over the course of 7 days? Yes, absolutely. When did that happen? I don't know. Did it need to happen billions of years ago so that everything could take place the way science says? No. God can do it any way He wants. And St. Augustine was even of the opinion, no, God didn't do it in 7 days. He just did it all at once because He's God. He can do what He needs. Which is true. But if it says it, that's enough for me. So that's kind of how I approach it. So I just take the scriptural record at face value. When I was in college, I worried a lot about how to reconcile the dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff, and really wrestled with this. And the older I get, the less I care. I just don't care. the dinosaurs were running around, great. When? I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me. It's not a big deal. It's not that important. And the more I learn about this, the more I think about it, the more I think this becomes a huge distraction when we start arguing about how this all fits together. And Ken Ham, notwithstanding, and all of his desire to try to make a good case for the Christian message, I just don't think it's that important. So I'm not one of these people who endorses and organizes big caravans down to the Creation Research Museum so we can all learn about our origins. I think there are more important things we should be paying attention to, frankly. So that's what I want to get into. Now, having set that up, you're saying, well, you better give me something worthwhile. And I think I can do that. So the creation account, we have two accounts, as you know. We have Genesis 1, which runs through about Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, is the first of the creation accounts. And in here, we get the account of the 7 days and the morning and evening, and God putting everything together. First 3 days of separating things out and distinguishing light from dark, water from land, and we got all the distinguishing going on. And then we have the 3 days of ornamentation where it starts to decorate each of the areas that he's separated and created out. So we've got that going on in the beginning. And then we have Genesis chapter 2 kicks in, and we have another creation account. This time with the focus more on man and Adam and his relationship to the rest of creation. And so some people say, well, you've got conflicting accounts. No, there's no conflict here. They're just two accounts. We got one from Fox, we got one from CNN, and they're telling the same story a little differently. And that's a little bit what's going on here. So we've got two accounts of the creation, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, which are complementary, and we learn things from both of them. And there are things to be gained from both of them. So we need to make sure we're clear on this. So in Genesis 1, probably the pinnacle of the whole story, and I was tempted to kind of read the whole thing, but you guys have heard it, and we don't need to do that. But we pick it up with verse 26 of chapter 1. My preferred translation is New American Standard, so I've got that here for you. Not that it's the best, it's just the one I'm used to, and I like it because it tends to be very direct and very literal in its translation, which means it's not a very easy reading translation. It's cumbersome. The reason I started using it was when I was way back in grad school, or in undergrad, learning Greek, we would use the New American Standard to check our translation of the Greek New Testament, because it's so fundamentally literal. So that's why I like it. So, Genesis 1. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them. God said to them, "Be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And there we have it. In 3 short verses, we have so much of the key of what's going on here of creation and why man is created and what it's all about. A couple phrases come through here again and again, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time just on these few verses because there's so much packed into here. So, first of all, I'll note this. We have this plural, "let us make man," and a lot of Christians say, well, there you have it, Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Maybe. And it's certainly possible, but it proves nothing. It just could be a deified plural, so don't make too much of that. But yes, we can see shades and echoes of the Trinity there. So God's having a divine conference. Let's make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky. Now this comes into the first of, I'm going to make, hopefully today, before I'm done, I'm going to try to give you 8 points, if it all goes according to my plan, of why the creation account is really significantly important. So that's my goal here, is try to get through all 8. And it should have been 7, because that's the holy number, but I just had 8, so that's what it is. So the first one is man's purpose. Man's purpose. And what comes through here then is, why is man created? What's the point? What is man's purpose? What does Genesis 1 say? It's pretty clear. Man's purpose is to rule over creation. That's his job. His job is to rule creation. So that's the first thing that comes through here very clearly in this account, is the purpose of man is to rule creation. We can even have the word in here, the old King James was to have dominion over the creation, which has the same Latin root as dominus, to be the Lord. You're in charge. So that's his purpose. Now, right off the bat, this raises some interesting things that should make you think, huh, man's purpose. In fact, it has been said, and one of my colleagues likes to say this is the first Great Commission. This is the first Great Commission. And being good Lutherans in this group, and being here on this campus that Billy Graham founded, or as first president, you know, evangelism's Great Commission, share the gospel, that's what it's all about. But the first Great Commission is right here in Genesis 1. What is man's purpose? And we say, well, it's to share the gospel. That's not his first purpose. His first purpose is to take care of the creation. That's why Adam was created. Adam and Eve were created by God to be in the creation and take care of the creation. That's task one. And where in the Bible was that first task of man ever rescinded or nuanced or changed? Nowhere. Nowhere. Your purpose is to be joined and linked to the creation. That's who you are. You're a human being linked to the creation. That's a foundational purpose of your very being. It gets to, and this is critical, it gets into the question of, what are we here for? And the French have this marvelous little phrase. I don't know much French. I learned it once, but 2 or 3 phrases, and it's your raison d'être, your reason for being. And it's a marvelous idea. Your reason for being, why you're even here. And the text here in Genesis tells you, your reason for being is to take care of the creation. That's your job. And we can just spend so long unraveling all of this and thinking about this. And as the day goes on and tomorrow goes on, we're going to come back to this idea more and more. What does it mean to be taking care of creation? Does it mean I have to go out and start planting wheat and farm? Does it mean I've got to, be a vine dresser and grow plants? Well, no, actually, all the different tasks and vocations we do are all, in a sense, taking care of creation. If you're a CPA, you're taking care of the numbers so that other people can take care of their things and do what they need to do. If you're a physician, you're taking care of the creation by healing people. If you're a pastor, you're taking care of the creation by helping people to know what it means to be truly human and what it means to be living in God's plan. So you see, all the different kind of meaningful, purposeful vocations we do fit into this overriding purpose of man's purpose is to be in the creation. But see, what's critical here is we're created for the earth. We're created for this earth. We're created for this creation. That's part of God's plan. If you're thinking a little bit, you should realize this kind of flies in the face of Calvinist theology. The Westminster Shorter Catechism. Are you familiar with this? Probably some of you have never heard of it. And that's fine. The very first question in the Westminster Shorter Catechism is what? What is the chief end of man? What is the chief end of man? And the answer is, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And this sounds so good. The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. We're made for God. But what does Genesis 1 say we're made for?
Rule the earth.
For the earth. There's a little difference here. Now, I do believe that when we're doing what God created us to do, working in the creation, serving the creation around us, that does honor God, and it does bring God glory. But in other words, it's kind of wrong when we get this idea that basically human beings are created to be part of the angelic, heavenly human chorus someday in heaven, and we're going to spend the rest of eternity singing in a praise choir that never ends. And this idea is kind of out there. And then you get the sense that in this world, this life is sort of the trial period. It's the valley of sorrow we have to get through to get to the good stuff. And this life is just a temporary kind of passing thing. And the real stuff's all coming at the end. That's not scriptural. It's just not scriptural. It's not the way it works in our Christian confession. We're created for this world. We're created to serve and work in it. And that's critically important. Now, that ties into my second big point here, which is this whole idea of the Imago Dei. The Imago Dei, which is Latin, for most of you know this, for the image of God. So the Imago Dei, the image of God, and that phrase shows up frequently here in our text, right? So let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and we'll make him in his own image, in the image of God. This phrase shows up 3 separate times in these short few verses, so it's obviously important. So what is the image of God? And humans have been wrestling with this, and Christians have been thinking about this for a long time. And a lot of people say, well, the image of God is the fact that we are rational. So God is a rational being, we are rational, so that's the image of God. Well, okay, maybe. There's a part of that, I think that's there, sure. But that creates problems when people start hearing the stories about animals who appear to think, like chimpanzees using tools. Oh, wait a minute, they're rational too. So we're not so special. So the rational part is okay, but maybe not that big a deal. Other ones say, well, it's the relational aspect. It's the fact that God is 3 persons in one God, and so therefore you have a relationality to God's very being. And so humans are built for relationship. And there's some truth to that. So I can live with that as well. But there's another aspect to consider, and that's the functional one. So what is man created for? Man's created for the purpose of ruling. And honestly, I think if you look at the context of Genesis 1, the functional one really does present itself and kind of rise to the top. Because the whole point is, God has said, let's make man in our image. And then what's the very next thing? And he's going to rule over the creation. So the very image of God is the responsibility to take care of the creation. That's critical. Now, that doesn't leave out the rational or the relational part. And I would say, essentially, all 3 are part of this idea of the image of God. But it's not just that we're rational beings, it's not just that we're relational, and it's not just that we're functional, it's all of these together. God gives us the ability to function well in our relationships, doing what we should do to rule over the creation. And think also about how man creates man, or God creates man as Adam and Eve, male and female. Together there's a relationship already in the very sexual relationship, and it's a relational thing. So this is part of how this happens. That the goal then is to rule the creation. That is integral to the Imago Dei. It's part of what it means. So to have the image of God is to have the responsibility of ruling over the creation. In a sense, Adam and Eve, man and woman, are in the God spot to the rest of creation. Creation looks to them for their leadership. Creation looks to them for guidance and for direction and for governing. C.S. Lewis, 20th century apologist and great writer, got this better than few people. How many of you have read Chronicles of Narnia or watched the movie, know the story? All right. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, very first book. You remember there's a scene early on in the book where the 4 Pevensey kids arrive in Narnia, this magical place, and there's talking animals and all these creatures running around, and the beavers are having a discussion, hosting the 4 Pevensey kids, kind of keeping them safe from the White Witch, and the beavers are talking, and they say to each other, one of them says to the other, do you think that these could be the fulfillment of the prophecy? Because there are 4 thrones in the palace, Cair Paravel, which are waiting for 2 sons of Eve and 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve to come and sit on those thrones and rule over Narnia again. And one of the beavers says to the other, well, you know, nothing's ever been right in Narnia when we haven't had a son of Adam ruling us. Whoa, C.S. Lewis, blow your mind kind of stuff. And it's just a passing little phrase, but see what Lewis is getting at is he's creating Narnia to be exactly what it's supposed to be. And in Narnia, who's supposed to rule? Man is. Man is supposed to rule. And when a witch comes in and takes over, that's not right. And you can't have a centaur or a beaver or a fawn ruling because it's not the way it's supposed to be. Man is supposed to be ruling. That's his job. That's what it means to have the image of God, is to have this responsibility to rule over the creation. All right? That's going on here. All right. Now there's more going on, though. So we have all of that packed in here. And then we get very clearly in verse 28, the first Great Commission, which is appropriate because the second Great Commission is also in verse 28. So we have, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So, translation and paraphrase, have lots of babies. Cool. Adam's probably thinking, all right, I can live with that. And my part's pretty easy. And subdue it. And so there we have the subdue part. And rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So there you have it. The first commandment is to fill the earth, rule it, care for it, protect it. That's all going on there. Then we go to Genesis 2. And we've got man is created. And here in Genesis 2, the story has Adam is created from the dust of the earth. God forms him up, breathes in him the breath of life. And now we have, then the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Okay? So man's put in the garden to cultivate and keep it. And the Lord commanded the man, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat from it, you will surely die. And this is the first indication of a limit, was specifically given. But there are others as well, implicit. So the idea of a limit on Adam. You're the Lord of creation. You're in the God spot. You're to subdue and have dominion over the creation. But you're not God. You're not God. And that's the third big point here, is man's limit. And the limit is he is not God. He is not divine. He is not completely in charge. There's a limit put on him, imposed on him. And the limit is made explicit for Adam. There's this tree right there in the center of the garden. Don't mess with it. Leave it alone. And so when Adam sees the tree and thinks of God's command and obeys that command, he is recognizing and affirming and admitting his creatureliness. The limit on himself. Now there are limits already. He's not able to call into existence new beings. God does that. He's not able to create a world. God does that. So he's already inherently limited by his creatureliness. But the tree makes it explicit for him. This is the limit imposed on you, Adam. You're not God. Don't forget. You're a creature. And so because he's a creature, he is inherently contingent. In other words, he is dependent upon God. He lives at the receiving end of what God gives. He is a passive recipient of God's giving. That's what it means to be human. To be human is to be limited. To be human is to be contingent, dependent. This is foundational to the scriptural account. So, when man is being truly human, he is limited. Which sounds exactly the opposite of how we think as Western Americans. Because as Western Americans, we think there are no limits on us. And the more we have the freedom to do whatever we want, the more we think we're being truly human. We're excelling without limits, without bounds. But the reality is, to be human is to be limited. One of my favorite theologians from the 20th century, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, really explored this quite thoroughly in a little book called Creation and Fall. And it's not a long book. It's only about 100 pages of really huge font with wide margins. But it's deceptively easy looking. And you think, oh, I can bang this out, no big deal. But you start getting into Creation and Fall, and you realize this is going to take some serious thought, and I've got to cope with some of these things. Because Bonhoeffer packs in these few words hugely important ideas. And one of the ideas that Bonhoeffer advances, I think quite rightly, is this whole concept of the limit. The limit being essential to Adam's very being. It's not like Adam is a free creature with a one little limit placed on him. No, his limitation is inherent to his very being. If he's going to be a true human being as God intended, he is going to live limited by his creatureliness. This is before the fall. The limitation is not a post-fall imposition. It's how God intended it from the very beginning. We're not limitless. We're not godlike in that way. We are always contingent, always bound, always limited. And what Bonhoeffer does so beautifully is he says, this is a gift from God. The limit imposed on Adam is a gift because it reminds him of his creatureliness. It reminds him of what it means to be truly human in a right relationship with God. This is significant because this means that the limitations on us aren't bad or part of the fall. So even at the eschaton, and this is why the creation is so important, because what we see going on in the beginning, in the first days of the world's creation and God's plan and his ordering of it, are brought to fulfillment at the eschatological fulfillment at the end when Christ returns. There's a continuity, a kind of book ending of things. And that's why we live now in the present. We don't know the beginning that well or the end that well, but here we are in the middle, knowing what it means to be human and learning what it means to be human from God's account of the beginning and from the promise of the end. So at the end, when all things are completed, we're not going to be these limitless, powerful beings. We'll be fully human creatures again, living rightly related to God, rightly related to one another, and to the rest of creation, doing what God put us here to do. So man's limit is inherent to who he is as a creature. All right, fourth point then is, the limit is good. So it's not a bad thing. The limit is good, because the limit helps us to see who we are, helps us to recognize our humanity, recognize our humanness. And that's part of what's going on with this limit and its importance. We recognize our humanness. And the idea comes in the groove that is cut for us. This is a phrase that Bonhoeffer's the translator uses in passing a couple of times, the idea of a groove. And what's going on here is the idea that God creates Adam and Eve, puts them in the garden, and gives them this first great commission. Make lots of babies, take care of the creation, look after things. So that means that there is a plan for Adam, and there's a plan for Eve. And Bonhoeffer uses the phrase of life in the groove. So there's a groove cut for Adam, and there's a groove cut for Eve, and they're not the same. Eve's got different things to do than Adam. That's a whole other topic. That's one of my points coming up. I'll put that one off. But there's a groove cut for each of them. And when Adam is in his groove, life works the way it should. He's taking care of the creation. He's looking after the plants, and he's harvesting the peaches when they're ripe, and he's tending the vines, and he's caring for the garden, and he's making sure the chimps are being good chimps, and the lions are getting along and doing all the things to do. He's taking care of the creation. And he's in his groove, and it's great. And he's limited. He doesn't get to make new things. He doesn't eat from any tree, and he doesn't touch the tree of knowledge and good and evil, because that's not his business. He doesn't eat from that tree because that's God's thing. He doesn't have to know everything. He knows what God tells him. Eve has her groove cut. When she's in her groove, things are good. So when you're living in the groove, life is groovy. I know, isn't that great? I live for that line. So, when you're in the groove, things are working the way they're supposed to do. It's the way they're supposed to be, and it's good. But see, when you're in the groove, there's a limit. It's like being on the tracks. My grandkids, I've got 7 grandkids. Oldest is 5, and then they go down to about 4 months. So it's a blast when they're all together. A little frenetic, but it's a blast. But one of my grandkids love this story, one of these little old golden books about the story of a train engine called Tootle. Anybody familiar with that one? I don't like it. It's too many words, and but he just loves trains, and he likes that story. And to me, the illustrations don't match the story very well. But the story's pretty basic. There's a young engine going off to train school, and he's learning to be a good train. And one of the number one rule is never go off the tracks. Never go off the tracks. That's the number one rule for trains. But this little engine gets tempted by racing a horse, and he likes to go out in the meadow and run around off the tracks, and he gets flowers in his wheels and things, and it's really embarrassing. So they finally teach him to stay on the tracks. So that's the story. Okay. But the moral of it's great, and so I'm not opposed to that. Because the basic lesson is this. Trains are built for the tracks. When they're on the tracks, everything is cool. And when it gets off the track, things are all messed up. It's not right. It's embarrassing. It's kind of weird. Trains don't go off tracks. And nowadays, we know if trains go off the tracks, they basically stop working. Everything gets derailed. We even use the phrase. That's what's going on here. So the same goes for our humanity. There is a track for us, a groove for us. When we're in it and on the track, things click right along. It's the way it's supposed to be. It's good. We get off that track and everything's out of whack. Everything's messed up. And in the second session this afternoon, when we talk about the fall, we're going to see essentially what's going on in the fall is man is jumping the track. He's not content to live with the limit. All right? So the limit is here. Now, this also means then that life in the groove is good, and when you're in the groove, doing what God created you to do, life is groovy and life is good, and you are free. You are fully human, and you are fully free in God's plan when you're living according to the limit. And this is a huge shock to most of our thinking in the West. Because we have been trained to think that freedom means lack of constraints, lack of rules. The more I'm able to do whatever I want, the more freedom I have. And when people are imposing things on me, that's a lack of freedom. That's not a scriptural definition of freedom. In the Bible and in the church's teaching, freedom means in sync with God's purpose. And for Adam, the purpose is clear. Live in the groove God's cut for you. When you do that, you will thrive. Get out of it, things are going to be messed up. So the limit is good. It is the groove, and it helps us to recognize our humanness and what it means to be human. That's all going on here, and you should recognize this. So we have the limit imposed. From any tree you may eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, because when you do, you will die, because you're out of relationship. Now, let's hear from Bonhoeffer just a little bit. This is from his book, Creation and Fall. And as you figured out by now, I don't do PowerPoint. So if you were looking for beautiful slides and cool transitions, sorry, I don't do that. Basically, I use my iPad like a whiteboard, which makes me very happy. So let's hear from Bonhoeffer. And this is Xeroxed out of or copied from my own version of my own book, so that's why there's lines all over it in writing, so you can ignore that. For this reason, Adam cannot know or think evil or death. He knows his limit because he knows God. He does not know that the limit can be transgressed. If he did, he would know about evil, but he knows it as the given grace of his creatureliness and freedom. Now, think about that a minute. What Bonhoeffer is arguing is that Adam doesn't know what it means to cross the limit. He can't conceive of this. In fact, Bonhoeffer argues, and I think quite rightly, that before the fall, Adam does not know good and evil. To know the difference between good and evil means you have to transgress something. He doesn't know what that means. And so even when God says, you will die, Adam thinks, I wonder what that means. You know, what's death? I don't know. And what's it mean to disobey God? What's that mean? For Adam, there's simply one thing. There is the will of God, who has created him, and the word from God saying, do this, and Adam's natural response as a human is, okay. That's what he's built to do. And so he simply lives in the groove, does what God designed him to do, and it's all good. His full humanity is not questioning God. To question God is inhuman, and is a diminishing of his humanity. It is an arrogance of thinking he knows as much as God. That's the temptation. God knows good and evil. Adam does not. He is bound by the limit, and the limit is a good thing for him. Because when he is limited by what he doesn't know, this is a beautiful thing for Adam. It's not a diminishing of anything. All right, so we go on. Further, Adam knows his life is possible only by his limit. He lives from this limit which is in the middle. And Bonhoeffer makes a lot of the middle, that we live in the middle. We don't know the beginning because that's hidden in God's origins. And we don't know the end because that will only happen when we actually get there. So we live in the middle, content to trust what God has given us, not knowing everything. And by the way, that's kind of the significant. That's a great bell call. Perhaps it's Midwestern. All right. So we live in the middle. We don't know the beginning, other than what God has told us. And we don't know the end, other than what God has told us. And we're content with that. But of course, man's not content with that, is he? Man is always wanting to know more and push past the limit and defy the limit. And I'm convinced, this is just a little sidebar, but I'm convinced part of the modern preoccupation with discovering our origins. You think about how much people are just fascinated discovering our origins. We send missions into space to try to collect space dust to learn about the beginnings of the universe. We're just driven by this, as if it's going to tell us anything that matters. But you see, we're not content to just live in the middle. We want to know the extremes. We want to know where do we come from and why. And when God tells us in the Genesis account, says, here's all you need to know, we say, well, that's not enough. No, that's not good enough. I don't believe that myth. There's got to be more. And so then we start to push to try to learn things we cannot learn. And in our arrogance, we're never satisfied with our limitation. And I really do believe that the modern scientific enterprise to just discover where we came from and discover the origins, that's driven by basic human sinfulness, by the demonic hubris of wanting to know everything. We don't know everything. We need to be content to live in the middle. All right, so on from here. Thus, Adam understands the prohibition and the threat of death only as a fresh gift, as the grace of God. The limit is grace because it is the basis of creatureliness and freedom. The limit is the middle. Grace is that which supports man over the abyss of non-being, non-living, that which is not created, and all this nothingness is only conceivable to Adam in the form of the grace given of God. So the key line here is, the limit is grace because it is the basis of creatureliness and freedom. Freedom comes living in the limit. Freedom comes living in the groove. Freedom comes living according to God's plan. This is foundational, guys, and this is right here in the creation account. How significant is this? Think about this for a minute. You know, what does it mean to be human? What does true humanity look like? You ask most Western people, you ask most Americans today, and they're going to give you some nonsense about free to do whatever I want, unlimited, you know, exploring everything. That's what it means to be truly human. And you think about the American example, right now what we're living at in our culture. What's driving our culture? What is the one sacred, special thing in our culture? It is the right to do whatever I want, to be who I am. The freedom of self-expression. If I'm a man in a woman's body, I'm going to live like a woman, and you have to deal with it, and everybody should be saying, good for you. That's America today. You see, the whole point is, we as individuals choose our reality. That's America today. And anybody who has the audacity to tell me, no, that's not who you're supposed to be, who are you to tell me what I'm going to do? You see, that's the one sin today. You can't do that. You can't look at a person and say, your lifestyle is at odds with God, stop doing that. Because they'll come back with, this is my chosen lifestyle, get off my back. And in America, they win. That's how it is. Because you see, nobody accepts this idea of a givenness to God's plan or of a givenness to the creation of a built-in limit. That's reality. Now, that's what's going on in the wider culture. And we all see it, and we all lament, and we all grieve about this, and we're all very concerned about it. Fine, well and good. What should be far more concerning to you, what should be far more alarming to you, is when those ideas show up in the church. And they do all the time. So I'm increasingly of the opinion, I'm not so worried about the culture anymore. It's going to go where it's going to go, and I'm not too optimistic about that. I'm much more interested in what's going on in the church. I'm much more interested in what my people in my pews are hearing and believing, and the people in my families are hearing and believing. That's enough for me. And this very idea of the limit being God's gift to us, how many of our own people get this and embrace this? How widespread is this idea that the groove is what it means to be truly free? Instead, how much has the American psyche invaded even our own thinking on these things? You know, no one's going to tell me what to do. Freedom means doing whatever I want. Okay, so chew on that a bit. So we go on. Again, no word in the passage indicates the possibility of understanding the prohibition differently, perhaps as a temptation. The prohibition of paradise is grace of the Creator towards the creature. God tempts no man. Don't miss this. You see, people frequently fault the creation account. They say, why did God tempt man like this. In fact, I just read on BBC about the Filipino president Duarte. You've heard about the strongman Duarte, and he is an atheist, and he hates the Catholic Church because they abused him as a kid. But he made some comment about, you know, what God would put Adam and Eve in the garden and then give them a temptation they can't resist. What kind of stupid God would do that? Duarte's words. And see, he sees the tree and the prohibition as a trap, like a tripwire. I think a lot of Christians see it that way too. Yeah, you know, there's Adam and Eve, and then God put a little trap there to test them, and they got tripped up. No. The tree of knowledge of good and evil and the prohibition not to eat of it is not a trap for Adam and Eve. It's not a nasty thing that God has put there. It's not the one negative thing. Adam can do whatever he wants. Oh, but he can't do that. Oh, there's a little black spot here. No, you're missing it entirely. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the place where Adam celebrates his creatureliness. It's where he acknowledges the built-in limits. It's where he knows, I'm a creature from God. I'm here to do what God says. I'm going to live in the groove. And by obeying God's command about the tree, I'm doing what God wants me to do. And let's be honest, it's not the only command Adam has. It's not as if there's one rule before the fall, don't eat from this tree. What else is there? Be fruitful and multiply. Take care of the garden. Cultivate it. Rule over the animals. Adam's got work to do. Name all the animals. He's got jobs to do. There's a groove cut out for him. It's got specificity to it. And Adam lives in the groove, and it's good. When he thwarts God's purpose, that's when, literally, all hell breaks loose. Because he's not willing to be the creature God created him to be. Yes, sir?
In Luther's works on Genesis, it says the tree was the first altar.
Yes, and you anticipated me perfectly. Thank you for leading me where I was going. This is exactly the point. Every time Adam walks past that tree and does not eat of that fruit, he is worshiping God. And that's why Luther says that the tree was in fact the altar for Adam and Eve. It was his place of worship. And this is the right way, this is the beautiful image from Luther. It helps to transform how we think about this. Instead of the tree being this sinister, evil, black tripwire, it's going to pull you down into hell, it's actually where Adam goes to worship God. I go by this tree, and I walk past it with indifference. And I've honored God and worshipped him. This is the point. So Adam is worshiping God every time he obeys God by not eating the tree and not disobeying God's plan. That's what Bonhoeffer's getting at here. So you see, God tempts no man. It's not a setup. Up to this point, only the Creator knows what the tree of knowledge of good and evil is. Adam does not know it yet. In fact, Adam won't know it until Genesis 3 when he eats the fruit. Then he knows good and evil. Then his eyes are open. But this is not an advance for Adam, it's a retrograde for Adam. Living in the unity of obedience, he cannot understand that which is twofold. Living in the unity of the knowledge of God as the middle and the limit of his life, he cannot think of breaking asunder of knowledge of good and evil. Adam knows neither what is good nor what is evil. In the most particular sense, he lives beyond good and evil. He lives the life that comes from God, in whose presence life in either good or evil would mean the unthinkable fall. So that's what I'm getting at. Adam just doesn't know good and evil. He simply knows the will of God. It's all here. So, critically important. The groove, the limit is good. It's God's good plan. That's point 4. All right, point 5. Point 5. We also have, especially back to Genesis chapter 1, we have this beautiful rhythm that begins to be established. There was morning, there was evening, a day. There was morning, there was evening, a day. There was morning, there was evening, a day. And we have 6 days, and then what happens on day 7? God rests, because he's just worn out from all that creating. Right? No! Come on! He's God! Do God need 7 days to get it done? Or 6 days to get it done? No! Augustine's right. God could have just spoke, boom, done. But he did it the way he did it, which should make us stop and think. So why did it happen that way? Why didn't God just speak one word and poof, there it all is? Why did he spread it out over 6 days? Why did he separate the water from the land? Why did he separate the sky from the land below, the firmament from the land below? Why did he do it that way? Why did he take the time to adorn it? Why did he create man from the ground up? Why did he do it that way? And why did he take an entire day to rest? What's with that? Well, the key, I believe, and this is one of Bonhoeffer's points as well, is what we have here is the establishing of the rhythm of life. So there's a rhythm going on here to how God creates. So we have 6 days of work, and then we have rest. And does that rhythm still hold today? Kind of fundamentally it's there. You can say, people work 7 days a week now, stores are always open, and we've kind of lost this. True enough, many things are kind of going against us, and yet the world still functions on a 7-day rhythm, doesn't it? The weekend comes, and we have another work week, and we keep going. And it's base 7, which is not very convenient. It's how it is. It's just the rhythm of the day. And the rhythm of the day is there too. So the sun comes up, and we get up, new day. And we work. Sun goes down, and we rest, we sleep, another day's rhythm. So there's this idea, this rhythm to the day, the rhythm to the week, and then we can even extend it to the rhythm to the year. And you have the seasons going, and the rhythm of the winter, and then the spring, and the summer, and the fall, and the rhythms of life. And then we can even think of the rhythm of an entire life. Growing up, adolescence, young adulthood, middle age, old age, and the rhythm of a life. And all these rhythms that are built into the very fabric of the universe, and you can try all you want to thwart them, but you can't do it. Because it's fundamental, and we can't get away from the rhythm. This is fascinating. Check this out sometime. But during the French Revolution, they experimented for a while with trying to change the rhythm. And they went to a 10-day week and a base 10 calendar. They even tried to change time, because a 24-hour day with 60 minutes, that's just awkward. So they tried to create a whole new system based on base 10 because it'd be convenient. And they forced it on everybody, and it just blew up. It didn't work. It failed. Yes?
An old Slovak pastor that I knew said it, the men and the animals, they wore out.
The men and the animals, they wore out. Yeah, a Slovak pastor would say that. I can hear that. And your accent was very appropriate. Thank you. Yeah, they wore out. You see, there's a rhythm to things that just can't be thwarted. You just can't get past it. Bonhoeffer wrote this book in the 30s. Okay, so it's one of his earlier books in the 1930s. And he talks about how technology fights against God's rhythm and the limit. And the technology he's thinking about is not cell phones and computers or even cars. The technology he's thinking about primarily is the light bulb. Think about how lights change the rhythm. Because instead of being in the dark when we all go to bed because you can't do anything, now we just flip on lights and we just keep going. And another literary comment. I mentioned C.S. Lewis, George Orwell, 1984. The place where the lights, where it is never dark. It's never night. And see, that's where all the insidious work is going on. And what are they doing? They're defying nature itself by making it perpetual daylight. And they're resisting the rhythm. This is cool. This is really profound. You see, it's the same message again. So the rhythm is part of the limit. We are limited by the very rhythm of the universe and how things work, and we can live in opposition to it, we can push back, or we can yield and live in it. To yield and live in it is freedom. Any of you guys ever worked a night shift? Mm-hmm. How did that work for you? You love it? Yeah. People hate it. And you try to get turned around, but it's just never quite right. And there's something to this. And we even acknowledge this. Yes, some people need to stay up all night and work. Yes, we get this. But there's something about that which always seems sort of out of sync, out of kilter. It's an abnormality. It's an aberration. And that's the idea here. Because there's this rhythm that's built into things. And it's there. There's a, excuse me, a Greek word I'm going to be using quite a bit over the course of these lectures. And in Greek it looks like this. And translation is taxis. In English it would look like taxis. All right, taxis, but you would say taxis. And taxis in Greek literally means the order. But it's not so much as in first, second, or third. It's more the idea of an arrangement. So it'd be like a flower arrangement or a design. That's really what taxis is. So when you arrange things, there's a taxis. If you go into my office at the seminary, there is an order. There's an arrangement. People like my wife don't recognize that. And it might even look to her like there's a lack of order. But to me, it's exactly the way it should be. And I know where everything is. You know what I'm talking about. There's an order. And that's the idea of taxis, the arrangement, the way things are put together. So that's all part of this rhythm, and that's point 5. When did this come into existence? On day 6. It's there from the beginning. The order, the arrangement, the rhythm is part of God's plan, built in from the beginning. Adam lives in sync with that, and he thrives. It's not a limitation on him in a negative way. It's a limitation that is freeing and liberating. All right. These implications for this are profound. All right. Point 6. Going forward, the differences between men and women. You guys remember this from your science classes, right? But, and I use these in class sometimes at seminary, and I have students going, what's with the circles and the arrow? And, okay. I don't ask them where they got their degree. That would be embarrassing. I just let it go, and I give them an answer, and I smile. Oh, that's just a symbol for male and female. And you know, by the way, that this is the male one, by the way, okay? And this would be the female one. And these are actually the symbols for Mars and Venus, okay, from the planets even. So Mars, and the way I had a 7th grade teacher who was not Christian, who told me, here's how you keep these straight. The symbol for a man has an arrow, which is the spear, okay, coming out, so he's warlike. And the woman with the cross on the bottom, well, that looks a little bit like a hand mirror, doesn't it? I know. Isn't that sexist and horrible? But he was a non-Christian teacher, and so I can get away with that. And I have never forgotten this mnemonic. It works. And now you won't forget everything either. You're stuck now. You know, you'll remember forever. So whether it's true or not, it works. All right. So the male and female differences are part of this. Are hardwired is the term I use. These differences between man and woman are hardwired. They're built in. They're part of the creation. This is a whole other topic in itself. I teach a class at the seminary sometimes called Man and Women in Christ, and we would spend 30 hours of class time talking about this stuff. And there's more to do. It's just that rich and that loaded. But just kind of put it in passing here and to say this very clearly, the male-female differences are hardwired into the universe. They're part of the fabric of creation. Men and women are fundamentally different. And the difference is not a post-fall imposition because of sin. The difference is there from the very beginning. Men are created to be men, women are created to be women, and together they are humanity as God intended it. And together they rule the creation. Together they have dominion. Together they are fruitful and multiply. It's just part of the plan, this relationality. And men and women are fundamentally different. The implications for this are enormous. It speaks to our feminist culture. It speaks to our gay rights culture. It speaks to all these kinds of things. Because the idea that men are men and women are women is not a post-fall idea. It's foundational. It's foundational to how things are. So these are hardwired into the creation itself. They need to be paid attention to. And as I said, that's a whole other topic. And we could spend a long time on that. And I would be delighted to do that, but that's not today's discussion. All right. Now, point 7 then, we're getting close to my end of 8. I promised you 8 points, and we're making our way through this. The creation is God's purpose. God creates out of no necessity. God creates without necessity. And what I mean by that is, God doesn't have to do it. And this is maybe a subtle theological point, but I think it's an important point because it reinforces everything I've been trying to get across today. God doesn't have to create. God doesn't need His creation. Why God decides to create, we don't know. We're not told. And we can speculate, but there's no point in doing that. Because we just don't know. For whatever reason, God simply decided to create. Before there was a creation, there was simply God. Was God lonely? No. He did not need companionship. He was not incomplete. God, by definition, is complete and total. He is God in His godness. We cannot even begin to grasp this, but He needs nothing else. And even Aristotle, and all the things he got wrong, got some of these things kind of right. Aristotle, thinking about God, realized that if God is a complete, perfect being, He needs nothing. And He needs to think about nothing else but Himself. Because what is better than Himself? And to think about anything less would be a lowering down. Now that's Aristotle. He's on the right track here. Because the point then is, God doesn't need the creation. He doesn't need you. Now that's a little devastating to our pride. Because, and even the Westminster Shorter Catechism, I think, kind of thwarts this a little bit. Chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. As if that's a good thing for God. Like, well, at least you can give God glory. See, that's what you're for. You're to give God glory, and you're going to make God smile today. No, you're not. No, you don't get to do that. God doesn't need you to do anything. God does not need your tithe. God does not need your time. God does not need your talents or your skills. God doesn't need you at all. God doesn't even need your stinking worship. Think about that. So, is God up there in heaven thinking, oh, I wish someone would worship me today. Oh, there's some worship. Thank you so much. The image is absurd. God doesn't need anything you offer. You, as a creature, need to give it. Don't get me wrong. Worship and service are essential to who you are as a human, and you need to honor God. First commandment, second commandment, third commandment are all about what creatures do when they're good creatures. They honor God and worship Him. But God doesn't need that from you. This is totally different from all the other creation accounts in ancient literature. All the other accounts, God wants somebody to take care of Him, or feed Him, or do something for Him. He needs somebody to get something done. So man is created because God has a need or a lack. This is not scriptural. God lacks nothing. So that means the entire creation is just completely God's business. It's His delight, His artwork. And you're part of that. And the cool thing is, you get to be part of it in a way that He honors and raises up to a level that He actually allows you to participate in the work with Him. How cool is this? But see, again, implicit in this whole thing is the very limitation on you. You are limited by definition according to what it means to be human, and when you live in sync with that, that's when true human thriving begins to happen. And so what this point does is that God creates without necessity is sort of lowers our human pride quite a bit. You're not such a big deal. You're not that important. You need to live on the receiving end of what God gives and understand that this is just by His grace. There is no justification for the creation besides that God just decides to do it. And that's enough. All right, and that leads me now finally to point 8, which you didn't think I would get to, but I will. And that's this idea then that to fulfill the first Great Commission, fulfilling the first Great Commission of being fruitful and multiply and having dominion over the creation means that culture building is good. So when we are working on culture building, and what I mean by that would be simply life in the modern world. Architecture, art, farming, raising families, music, literature, language, all of that, all these human pursuits are good. Because that's part of cultivating the creation. See, what this means then is, if we actually pay attention to Genesis 1 and 2, a garden is more God-pleasing than wilderness. And see, now again, this also flies in the face of our modern sensibilities, where we have the Sierra Club, you know, humans ruin everything, just stay back and let it take its course. That's pure, that's beauty. And there is a beauty in what God has created, no doubt about it. Mountains, icebergs, it's all cool, I get that. But The garden is what God put us here to do. And if you pay attention then, man is put in the garden to cultivate the garden. So a well-mowed lawn is more pleasing to God than rank weeds. Go home and mow the lawn, okay? You get the edger out, and make it clean and neat. There's something to this. There is something to this. My parents both grew up on farms, so they were into all this kind of stuff. And I used to think it was just because leftovers from their upbringing. But now I'm coming to realize that actually caring for your land is part of who we are as humans. There's something to this. So a garden is pleasing to God. Now, so a garden is pleasing to God, that's cultivating. Well, so is literature and music and other forms of art. It's taking what's there and cultivating this and bringing it into an even better kind of a way of honoring God and serving each other. This is God-pleasing. It's not a negative thing. And the implication of this then is that the material world is not evil. This idea just continues to hound us in the church. We just can't get rid of it. And that's the idea of Gnosticism. Sorry. So Gnosticism. And you remember Gnosticism was this ancient heresy, and it said a lot of goofy things. But one of the most significant things it said was that the material world is inherently evil. And that the material world is opposed to God. The spiritual world is good and God-pleasing and holy, and we need to free the spiritual things from the material things. That's Gnosticism. It's not Christian. But these ideas just hound us in the church still to this day, where we have some sort of idea that spiritual means holy, material means satanic, unholy. And so material things like the world, not as important as spiritual things. Taking care of your yard is not as important as reading your Bible. And we even have the story of Mary and Martha seems to bear this out. We'll talk more about that later, because that needs to be revisited. But the fundamental idea here we need to get across that comes from the creation is the material world is good. It's God's good creation. God made it. God planned it. It's His design. It's His intention. It's His good plan. It's not inherently evil. And yes, it's shot through with sin. More on that this afternoon. And sin has messed everything up, but it's still God's good creation. We shouldn't be fleeing the material world because it's material. The material world is the place where we live and function and move. So this has implications for sex and families and caring for the creation around us. Has implications for our work and our vocations. Has implications for balancing out between what's truly serving God. Should I leave the dairy farm and go to the seminary so I can serve God with my life? Short answer, no. But the implications are all tied up in this idea of what it means to embrace the material world as God's good creation. That's part of what's going on here. So we need to fight against Gnosticism at every turn because it's opposed to what God has done. So, 8 points. And I would argue that they're all right here in this very short Genesis account, which is so much more than just when did God create and when did dinosaurs run around. There's so much more going on here of what it means to be human and live in the world today. And these are questions that have direct bearing on how we live, far more profound than when the world was created or when the glaciers roamed across Minnesota and all those kinds of issues. That's not nearly as important as these basic issues of what it means to be human, what it means to live as God's creature. All right, I'm at my time. Thank you for your attention. More this afternoon.